Hi guys! I can't believe this look is finally over. It took me too much time to make, but I am very happy with how it turned out. This tutorial is probably the longest I have done, but this cosplay is a little too complicated and I tried to include everything. Of course, it's divided into chapters so you can skip to the part you want to focus on. As you can see, my cosplay isn't 100% accurate, but it was my aim to make a more realistic kind of look rather than animated. So I will say that this is my version of a Jinx cosplay. Let's get this party started! I'll start with the wig. Let me preface this by saying it's a well-known fact that I don't work well with wigs. I just don't get it. Or maybe I need more practice, but yeah, I didn't like how this turned out. Jinx's hair is too long, so I bought two wigs. One expensive lace front so my forehead will look nice, and a cheap one that I dyed because I couldn't find it in the same color. I start by dyeing the cheap wig. I followed the same method as last year's Harley Quinn tutorial, which is the rubbing alcohol and ink method. I don't think you have to go through this, you can just use red dye or something, but I wanted to go with a more time-consuming method. Anyway, I fill two spray bottles with rubbing alcohol and ink from blue markers. I let them rest for about 24 hours and then I start spraying ink on the wig, which of course I have pinned on a styrofoam head. I spray quite a lot of it in each section and I spread it using my fingers. I also use a comb to keep the hair from tangling. When the ink is over, I refill the bottles, use new markers and repeat. I told you it's incredibly time consuming, just dyeing the wig took me about 2 weeks. I dyed it up until the point that I could cut the hair in an even length. When it's completely dry and I am satisfied with the color, I rinse it in cold water. Ideally till the water runs clear, but it never did, so I said whatever. Then I let it dry on a bag in my balcony. After it has dried completely, I brush it slowly in small sections till it's nice and combed. Using two hair ties, I concentrate the hair in one thick ponytail, which I cut and store carefully. Now let's do the other wig. As I previously said, this is a more expensive lace front one. I pin it on the head, and because I wanted a more natural hairline, I start plugging hair with the tweezers. She also has a widow's peak that I wanted to mimic, so I plugged a lot of hair. Looking back, maybe this was a mistake, but anyhow I put it on my head in order to cut the lace and a couple of sideburns. This wig also had a middle part, which Jinx definitely doesn't have, so I wanted this wig to also look united. I separate the fringe in the front and then I take very small sections next to the middle part and lay them on the opposite side. I do that for the entire middle part, and when I dragged the hair a bit, the middle part disappeared, so I sealed the thing with hairspray. It took me too long to make the braids, and I don't think it's worth your time for me to explain it because it's unnecessarily complicated, so just make 2 braids. And make sure the hair is slicked back on the sides. It's time for these two to become one. I take the ties out and very carefully separate the hair into even sections. Plus I keep some for the fringe. Then I try to glue it on the lace front with hot glue, but I did an oopsie. Just go watch Alison's tutorial for this because I just can't. Half my work got ruined by me. I tried to make 2 braids and blend the hair of the lace front to the cheap wig and I kind of failed, but the braids can't stay on my back while I pose and no one will notice. For the fringe, I take the extra lock I kept from the cheap wig, I dip it into white glue because I decided I am awful with hot glue, and I stick it on the base of the lace front. For the hair that pops out of the braids, I use hairspray to hold it together. Now for the hair accessories, it has 7 bullet shells and 2 thick nuts. Okay, that sounded weird. I made them all using foam. I noticed the bullet shells have different widths, so I cut 2 pieces at 4 cm, 2 at 5, another 2 pieces at 6 cm and 1 at 7 for the long bullet shell. Those are of course sizes I chose to use, feel free to make them however you wish. I even made the dents on the upper part of every shell, even though no one will really notice. Then I just wrapped each piece around the braids and glued it with hot glue. You can see what a bad job I did with the hair, but ignore it for now. Before I paint the pieces, I cover them in white glue and then using gold and silver metallic paints, I coat them twice. I made the nuts by sketching and sketching, trying to see what fits around the braid and still has a hexagonal shape. I made them 3-dimensional by adding small walls around 1 cm in width, and of course I left a small cut in order to wrap them around the braids later. I glued the pieces, covered them in white glue, and I painted them dark silver. About the fringe, I tried something off camera because I was too stressed to film it. I basically put on the wig, cut the hair shorter and teased and sprayed. No matter how much I teased and sprayed, it wouldn't stay up, so I propped it up with bobby pins inside the lock. That concludes the wig part, finally! Extras. Jinx has quite a few of them extra details. I include them all here because they are scattered throughout the look and I wanted to explain them all at once. I basically made almost all of them out of foam, starting with a band-aid. I sketched one very roughly on my calf with a pen. You don't have to do it this way of course, I just wanted to make it faster and more accurately. After I am happy with the shape and size, I take a piece of white foam, press it on my leg and ta-da! It's been transferred. Then I cut 2 rectangular pieces about the same size, fix the edges, cover them in white glue and then paint them beige with grey outlines. For the studs she has on her belt and the left glove, I used clay. For the studs on the glove, I used my left hand and molded them on top, giving them a diamond type of shape. As for the cones on the belts, I made cones. When the clay had completely hardened, I sanded them and then painted them gold and silver. For the belt buckle, I drew a hexagon with 2 of the parallel lines longer than the rest and made sure they matched the width of the belt. I also cut 2 pieces like this for the X shape and made little dents using tiny screws. Again, I covered those pieces in white glue and I painted them gold with some highlights. Now for the small belt she has on her left arm. I found a very thin brown belt and I cut it in smaller belts, measuring them around my arm. I also bought a couple of these little guys. I wrapped a piece of the belt around them and glued it. I made small holes and glued a small piece of wire to be able to buckle it later. I tinted them with very diluted acrylic dark brown paint. As you can see on the final look though, I ended up using only one of them because I mismeasured and I couldn't buckle the rest. Time for boots! The fairy from the last tutorial was kind enough to give me a pair of old boots. They don't look that similar to Jinx's, but I made some modifications. Hers have a thick front, they sort of look like clown shoes, so I took a big piece of clay and built the extra volume. Of course, I did it on both of them. As for the tiny X's on the sides, I cut very thin strips of hot pink foam and I glued them according to my reference pictures. In order to cover the clay on the front, I used black faux leather. I made sure it covered the clay and I folded one side to itself, making a wannabe hem. Then I glued the side towards the rest of the boot and trimmed the faux leather wherever it exceeded. I glued the rest of it in sections, folding them as well because I had to cover a round surface. I made these pieces out of foam and I painted them the same way I did with so many others, and I glued them on the front of the boots. I cleaned up the remains of the clay, wrapping the boots with Q-tips dipped in water. Her boots also have some flaps around the top, so I cut 4 pieces of foam the same width as the sides and about half the height of the boots. With hot glue I covered those pieces in faux leather, and with Velcro I attached them on the east sides of the boots. I forgot to show that I painted a pair of shoelaces pink. The belts and suspenders. You can make your own belts out of foam and fabric, but I happen to have 3 belts lying around, so I just dressed them in black faux leather. Hers might be dark brown, but I prefer them in black. Let's just watch the time lapse. I'm sure it's pretty self-explanatory. I followed the exact same process with the rest of them. To make the piece of the belt with the studs, I cut a piece of foam, which I covered in faux leather as well. Then I wrapped another piece around the belt and glued it on the other piece so it can be moved, and of course glued on the studs. I made this little thing on the edge of the belt with small pieces of foam. Clothes. Hanging there, we still have a lot left to cover. My mom gave me this pair of purple pants. The color is fine. The problem I have though is that they are middle-waisted and a bit tight. I found that by unzipping them and sliding them a bit lower, I achieved the look I want if we ignore the fact that my underwear can be seen. With soap I make marks where I want to cut them, but generally speaking, just a bit below the knee is fine. I cut them according to the reference pictures and I wrap them up even more using sandpaper. Now for the paint job. Ignore those lines, I was trying something. To keep the pants stretched, I filled them in with my yoga mat and a foam roller for the back to make them more steady. With light purple acrylic paint I draw lines. As you can see, I have the references right next to me, not that the stripes have to be exactly identical, but they generally help me get the vibe, you know? In my case, the fabric absorbed some of the paint, so I had to do a couple of layers for each stripe. When the front side is dry, I move on to the back. After that, I make light grey paint and with a thin brush I outline the stripes. For the purple flaps she has on the side, I cut a piece of foam the same shape and I glued the purple t-shirt to cover it. These are the pants somewhat finished. I cut a square out of white fabric which I painted grey with a pinch of green, and another piece of the same fabric which I painted the same but with more white and yellow mixed in. It goes on top of the square one and I wanted to mark it before I cut it. And this is the foam piece from earlier, all dressed in purple. I also painted a light gold line around the rim later. Around that time I started gluing them. I mean, there are so many pieces hanging around the pants, you have to glue them. With the help of a friend while I'm wearing the pants, we glued the square piece first, then the striped one on top, and the main belt on my right side. It buckles with Velcro of course, and it comes around like this. The purple piece goes on top of the belt on my right side. Sorry for the abrupt cut, but I'll explain. I glued the belt buckle on, and here you can see how we propped and glued the suspenders. They're glued either on the inside of the pants or the back of the belt. They form an X in the back, and the one on my left side comes out of the pants. I also glued on those pieces I made out of foam again and painted silver, and I wrapped their edges around the suspenders. Them sleeves. Another complicated part of the look. For the striped purple sleeve, I used that purple shirt again and a rectangular piece of foam which I wrapped around my arm just below the elbow to make that enhanced look. I cut the sleeve, and to hold the foam together I used an elastic band that I sewed on it. I fold the sleeve to cover the foam, and I fold it again below the foam. I also glued it this way later on. With light purple acrylic I did the same as the pants. On the sleeve though, the dark purple stripes are thinner and there are no outlines. For both arms I used long black gloves that I cut the fingers off of, and for the left arm I used black foam and made a kind of thick bracelet, I guess. I put velcro on it as well. Now for the left arm I sewed a small piece of elastic faux leather. Of course you can use whatever fabric you like. I painted with acrylics again a black piece of fabric grey and darker grey. I quickly figured out that this piece goes below the faux leather one and the glove. Then the purple one goes over the glove, and I glued the gold studs I made earlier. As for the small belts, I think I mentioned before what happened. Oh, you got to the shirt! That's lovely! Remember my friend with the sewing machine from last year with the seamstress mom? She had to come back and help me with this. Her mom made this pattern. We lay the pieces on top of the faux leather that I chose and traced them with markers. We cut some of those pieces more than one times in order to sew them together, like this. We had folded the faux leather, so the parts that we needed more times came out at once. Now that we have them all ready, it's time for the sewing machine. She first took the center triangle piece and sewed the part that goes just below the neck. She made short cuts vertically onto the seam. This way she was able to fold it properly without it being puffy. Then she sewed the two angle straps that go on the sides of the center triangle piece, but she only sewed the short side. She did the same in order to fold them on both, and then she sewed the long sides on the sides of the triangles. She made seams on the outer sides but left the upper part so she could turn it inside out later. She cut the corner there till the seam. In order to sew the upper straps, she used pins to hold the fabric in place. On the outer side that she left unsewed, she folded the edges in and secured with pins. Now for the back, she sewed together the small triangle, the sides first in order to turn it inside out. Then she made another seam on the outside on both sides. Jinx has some hoops on her back. We used the big one for the neck straps and the small one for the triangle. She sewed the small piece to go in between and then made seams around the hoops. She did that for the neck straps as well. I hand sewed the triangle around the hoop because the machine couldn't, it was too thick. For the bottom of the shirt, she sewed this very long rectangular piece, which then she pinned on the bottom of the shirt over the front side and sewed it in. She then made small cuts again to fold it. She followed the same procedure for the smaller rectangular piece and triangle. Lastly, she made another seam on top of the rectangular pieces front and back, close to the upper seam to make them less puffy. As for the belt at the bottom of the shirt, her mom gave me a brown belt that looks very similar, and I replaced its buckle with one that looks more similar to Jinx's. I also added a couple of those guys that hold it in place by cutting a piece my friend showed earlier and kept the edges together with stapler needles. I added elastic bands on the sides so the front and back sides won't be flying around and make it harder for me to buckle the belt. To make the circles, I used a piece of the pattern and drew them on. I also cut a few pieces of foam the same size I want the studs to have, and to make them seem rounded and more three-dimensional, I used hot glue on the bottom and pinched them along their entire length till the glue hardened and kept the foam in place. I then trimmed the sides, covered them in white glue, and I made another piece for the edge of the belt, which I also covered in glue. I painted all those pieces gold, and while they were drying, I cut 2 pieces of white gauze which I dirtied up using very diluted dark brown acrylic paint. I glued the studs on, as well as the gauze pieces, on the inside of course. I wanted the clothes to have more of a worn out look, so I took sandpaper and went to town on the faux leather. Then with body paints I gave some highlights here and there which I blended with my fingers. I roughed up the pants as well with a bread knife and body paints. As you can tell, I am terrible at explaining this stuff, so if you have any questions about anything, feel free to ask me in the comments. Okay, now we are getting towards the end. Hi! I started with my body. First, I spread around white body paint to make my body appear paler, mainly on the parts that are tanned like my arms and neck. Then I drew on the tattoos using a thin brush and light blue water-activated body paint. I used the reference pictures, of course, and it wasn't very easy because, you know, mirrors, so I had to draw them reversed. I also had to draw them with my left hand. And at some parts that seemed a bit too complicated for me, I just improvised. If they look like clouds, it's enough for me. Also, sorry for the partial nudity. I filled them in with light blue and outlined them with a darker blue. If I misdrew in some places, I clean up with makeup wipes. I puff powder on top to make them look more like they are under my skin, like tattoos. Finally, we are doing the makeup. I put on 2 wig caps and I started by applying a primer. After that, I applied a very light foundation and concealer in some basic places like under the eyes, chin, forehead and stuff. I painted the eyebrows with a dark brown pencil, but I also used a very thin angled brush and my fingers wherever I needed. Her eyebrows are quite long and expressive, so I tried to mimic them the best I could. For contouring, I used cream contour and tried to make my face look more like hers. I basically contoured from my chin up to the beginning of my cheekbones because she doesn't have that strong of a jawline and she has a thinner chin. She also has a very interesting nose. I make some strong lines starting from the inner corners of the eyebrows and I just watch. The instructions might not be the same for your face anyway, it's different for everyone. I made some marks for the dark circles and I shaded inside my cupid's bow. I blended it out with a contour brush and brown eyeshadow. I contoured below my lips and my forehead as well. She has a very small one. I blended the rest of the contouring with a thinner brush and brown eyeshadow. Then I took a very light concealer in a relatively thin brush to highlight other parts of my face, like my nose, my upper lip, next to my nostrils, right below the dark circles and stuff. With a thin blending brush, I darkened the circles below my eyes, and then with a thin brush and a black creamy pencil, I drew a very messy and thick cat eye. With black eyeshadow on an angled brush, I set it and blended more to the rest of my lids. I also used a bit of black body paint and dabbed it in to make the eyeliner more intense, and during the blending, I used some burgundy eyeshadow on my dark circles as well. I curled my lashes and put on mascara. Of course, I set the concealer with a light beige eyeshadow. I applied very little blush, and with the same pencil I drew the eyebrows. I make small dots in random points on my nose and cheeks to draw freckles. I tapped them with my fingers to blend them. I used a not as dark lipstick as I should have. Later I lined my lips with a brown pencil. I set my face and I wrapped a thin strip I had cut of the faux leather around my neck 3 times. I stuck it just below the neck straps of the shirt. I buckled the belt around the shirt the same way she seems to have hers buckled. I applied spirit gum on the band-aid and stuck it on my left calf, and I put on my wig and glued it using spirit gum. She has some cute nails, and even though I prepared some fake ones, I didn't feel like wearing them. I don't know, I prefer them naked. For the gun, I tried to make something at the last minute using a toy gun, toilet paper tubes, foam and acrylic paints. I won't include instructions because it's silly. I can't believe it's over. It's been a real trip, this cosplay. As you can see, I also took a couple creative initiatives, and for example, I made the belts black and the shirt brown using faux leather and not some other fabric, or I didn't make each part exactly like you see in the animation. She has so many details that I don't think the difference is notable, and I think these changes serve the more realistic look just fine. I really hope you like it. Huge thanks to everyone that helped me. I have the bestest of friends. Huge shout out again to my friend Kelly for the amazing clips and pictures, Natalia and her mom for the help with the shirt, and of course everyone else which I will mention on my Instagram, so make sure to follow me at MonsterPolly and subscribe here on my YouTube channel. I don't know if I managed to upload this before Halloween, but I wish you a very merry Halloween and a happy new year, because I don't know. Thanks for watching, I'll see you around. So long everybody!